Hey Tony, it's Friday, and first off, to answer your question of the week, there are two board games that I've played recently that I really enjoy and really would recommend. One of them is Splendor, which is a game that Taylor and I love. Really good strategy game. I've mentioned it before to you, so I won't go into too many of the details because I don't really need to. The other one was actually one I played last Sunday that was called Shogun. Imagine Japanese Risk with a drop tower that you drop little colored blocks down to try and win the fights. I played it with my LARPing friends. None of us had ever done it before, but we all had a really good time with it. And one of our leaders, Mac, had been wanting to play that game for ages and ages and ages. So we did that, which was pretty fun. So now, Tony, this week I want to talk a little bit about the government shutdown because it's really getting to me, and it's so aggravating because so much of what's going on would be easy to get over if both parties and both sides of the conflict weren't so deeply entrenched in their beliefs that we're in, I think, day 13 of the shutdown now. Day 13 or 14, I don't know exactly which. So, in my lifetime, there have been, I want to say, 4 shutdowns. There have been 3 in the past few years alone. The last one was, it might have been just before I was born because I don't distinctly remember, but it was when Bill Clinton won the presidency and and Republicans owned the House. And there was a government shutdown that I think lasted 28 days, something like that. 21 days, I think was what it was. And so the current shutdown we're in right now is on day 13 or 14. Now, the reasons for the shutdown they're not exactly numerous. Essentially, it boils down to President Trump refuses to sign any funding bill that doesn't include a payment for the wall, his campaign promise of the wall on the Mexican border. And the Democrats are just not willing to give him that because one of their firm beliefs is that the wall is a pointless waste of money that just makes America look uninviting. And in this regard, I actually side more with the Democrats. I feel that border security is something that we need for sure. I don't think anybody's going to dispute that. I don't think most anybody's going to dispute that because border security is important. There are a lot of issues on all sides of the border and in our country itself that border security is not a bad thing. But the idea of a giant wall, in my opinion, is a 19th century solution to a 21st century problem, and thus not effective in the slightest. But a lot of what it boils down to is just how ingrained people are in their beliefs, at least the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress, and particularly with President Trump. Now, President Trump has been promising the wall since he first started his campaign in 2015. So we're at almost 4 years now. I think he started his campaign March of 2015, something like that. And so to go that far back, this has been his key promise for, like I said, almost 4 years. And obviously 2 years into his presidency, it hasn't happened. And the government is shut down because of it. In my opinion, one of the core functions of a government, and legitimately one of the easiest things to do, is to keep the government running. And that means passing spending bills when you have to make sure that federal employees get paid, or to make sure that people who depend on federal services get those services, or those who want to go to national parks get that opportunity. One thing that has made America incredible in many regards is the fact that we've had such an effective state who's been able to help both the rich and poor alike in the country. And with this shutdown here, that's just not happening. I read an article today that made me incredibly angry. So obviously, as you know, I did housing work for years, and I was reading an article today of some people who are most impacted by the shutdown right now are people who are not getting their money to help pay their mortgages, to help pay their rents, and also the poorest of our people who have Section 8 and depend on housing and urban development for what they can do. So Section 8, just a really brief, very brief thing, is a federal subsidy Federal subsidies are when the government pays a portion of your rent. Now, you have to be under a certain income, you have to go through a really long waiting process, and you get some of your rent paid by the federal government. It was part of the Fair Housing Act, and the goal was basically to make it so people can have a home. It's a very simplistic explanation, but it's a solid explanation for what I'm trying to point out right now. And currently, HUD is shut down because they're not considered to be essential employees. In fact, there are 800,000 federal employees right now that haven't worked in 2 weeks because they are non-essential employees. And that's hard. There are a lot of people out there who most people obviously depend on their paychecks to keep their homes fed, keep a roof over their head, keep their families set up and in school and things like that. And even a brief, quote-unquote, brief shutdown of 2 weeks can have lasting impact on a lot of those families. And that's been a serious issue with this current shutdown. Now, I'm not going to say I have a solution as to what we can do on the shutdown, but I do have a couple ideas that I would like to throw out into a public discourse, which is hard, I know, because public discourse just doesn't exist. But what we need right now is we need a compromise. Obviously, the Democrats are not gonna fold on the wall, and Trump's not gonna fold on something without the wall. Now, there have been attempts at compromises, which have increased like $1.6 billion for border security, but not the wall, which President Trump was all set to sign off on until he started to get some flack from his base. And if there's one thing that's been established through President Trump's presidency, is that he relies on his base, and they are his constituents the way he sees it. So he's not as much a president for me here in New England, in metropolitan liberal New England. He's instead somebody who's trying to impact his base in the Midwest, in the South. People who have supported Trump from the very beginning. People like James. And that's his base, and he's playing for that base completely, which is alienating a lot of other groups within the country, but it's not going to impact Trump's 2020 run, as far as his base is going to keep supporting him no matter what. He's done too much for his base for them to not vote him in, and there's no way they're going to vote against any establishment Republican or any Democrat against President Trump. But what he's doing is he's making people have issues with their homes. Again, I bring up HUD. There are people who depend on their Section 8 that aren't getting their Section 8. And that means landlords aren't getting paid. And if landlords aren't getting paid, they start evicting to try and get people in who can pay. And these are people who are not federal employees. There's people who depend on the government to survive. And it's not coming together. So we truly need a compromise. I'm not going to say I have the answers, because I don't. There's just no way that I have all the answers here. But I have an idea, and that would be to get the sides together, establish what you want. Let me rephrase. What we always did in the legal profession is you go with your number one deal that you hope everybody agrees with, and then you go with your very bottom deal that is your last that you're going to do. And that's what we need now. Obviously, both President Trump and the Democrats in Congress have their two strong sides. President Trump needs that border wall, and he wants the spending bill to have that, whereas the Democrats want nothing about that border wall in there, and that's their base. That's their core there. So we need to find somewhere in the middle there, something that doesn't quite get a wall, but also helps add more border security, maybe adding fencing or et cetera, et cetera. But all I know is this needs to get solved, because today there have been threats that the shutdown could go for months or even years. And when your government stops functioning is when you have an issue. So Tony, my question for you is, what ideas do you have to try and help the government work better? Tony, I will see you on Tuesday. Later, bro.